Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Trezise. I'm President and CEO of Lansing Economic Area Partnership, LEAP, which helps coordinate economic development activities for Ingham, Eaton, and Clinton County, otherwise known as the Greater Lansing area. And it's perfect. I'm following up with Brian Abraham, and then Paul is following me. They both have such a global perspective and yet driven about local economic development. And in our earlier conversations about innovation, we seem to talk about that there are two types. One is more the entrepreneurial, someone wants to make money, which is great. And then there's another kind which people want to make a difference in their organizational structure through powers of persuasion or politics or policy. And in great part, that's where the actual profession of economic development is. And I like to just chat a little bit about that at the beginning, because I'm going to suggest to you that the very profession itself is going through a major innovation. I'd like to share with you my personal observations and sometimes struggles about that. And at the end, they'll blur it right back in with the entrepreneurial policies that have been enacted as a result of some of this innovations. Well, and I think this is a very important discussion from our profession standpoint, because ultimately the sort of average Joe or the public itself, has to be bought into economic development. There has to be support for a policy in the end. People on the street need to feel that we're making a difference in their daily lives, in their actual family lives. And, well, hopefully you'll be interested by some comments in relation to that. But just, I hate to do it, but a bummer for a minute. I just want to tell you where we've been. A brief history of economic development here in the state of Michigan. I've been doing it for 20 years here locally and across the state. But Brian is exactly right. We were the powerhouse of the world 120 years ago in the powers of innovation and entrepreneurialism. There's no question about it. I mean, many of those inventions and innovations we still are enjoying today, like electricity. Just as things like that. So, but through the 1970s, 80s, and 90s in economic development, we generally were building industrial parks for manufacturing and some warehousing, and we always talked about putting in public infrastructure supports, primarily sewer, water, and roads, and that we always talked in terms of, and I'm doing my finger quotes here, good paying jobs. I mean, that was really pretty much fundamentally, and then you try to retain and attract. And that was a pretty good life, especially in the 90s when I was doing it. It's hard for some people to recall, but Michigan really could attract plants. I mean, we did it all the time. It was a lot of fun. You would land a plant or two every year in your industrial park. And there's nothing like doing that and seeing a building go up in a matter of a year and having the groundbreaking ceremony and the ribbon cutting for the place opening. And lo and behold, there's 150 people or so there that are, actually going to maybe be there for 20 or 30 years. That was actually still the thinking, not all that long ago. And we now in the profession, we certainly did talk about diversification, but it's very difficult when no matter what, the core of what you are as a culture is the auto industry itself. So it's always been a struggle for us as a state. And then 2001 hit. I started at the MEDC, and lo and behold, I started at what's called the Community Assistance Team, and I started Michigan Main Street program. And these programs had tremendous impact on downtown development. Good timing from my professional standpoint, although sheer dumb luck, because little did I know that the world, I mean, you literally can look at 2001. And some people would point to 9/11. Not really. There's something else about 2001 that was a snap or a tipping point or something like that, where the world became, where we and everyone in the world became truly global. And suddenly there was some sort of special burst in technological advancement. Walmart, maybe set the new standard for offshoring manufacturing, for low-cost manufacturing. I don't know, some combination of those, and we could, of course, talk all afternoon about the rest of those things and why this all happened. But in Michigan, it's important to note that we lost something like, in a few-year period of time, 750,000 manufacturing jobs. And then if you think about an average-sized family of four, I told you it's a bummer part. I'm actually trying to get out of it already, but it's important to note. 4 in 10 Michiganders, whatever we are, were impacted by a job loss. I mean, it's mind-boggling, actually, when you think about it. I mean, we had a Katrina happening every day, essentially, and I truly mean property damage, property values collapsing, people losing their lives, all related to job loss. I mean, over a period, I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Basically, out of Detroit, they lost, 35%, maybe in a few-year period of time. Of course, it goes back 50 years, but in that short period of time, population. I mean, if you compare that to the great population disasters around the world, I mean, like, a total population exodus from X amount of X area to another, it's in comparison to what happened to Detroit. I mean, so I just want to lay out where we were. So Brian also and Paul, but Brian reminds me mostly that entrepreneurialism comes from choice or desperation or something like that. And so our profession, I think, is in the latter category. We had to do something, and primarily we threw money at companies who said, we'll keep a quarter of our workforce in place. Good, here's an incentive. You know, that's what we did. I'm not being critical of it. What else were we to do? I mean, it was a perfectly natural response in my mind. Was it super effective? You know, I don't know. That's a debate for another time. Finally, in 2008, well, then the whole darn thing collapses. You have GM bankruptcy, financing for mixed-use projects in our downtowns, which was basically the primary function of economic development in the state during the 2000s. Even that completely dried up, or almost totally dried up. And here's something important, and which I think was the final straw on why our profession is having to innovate, and is innovating right now, is we lost, you know, it's great being in economic development. We're the good cop all the time. The job is totally fun. People love us because people do love economic development. Except now, in 2008, we lost all of our friends on both sides of the aisle. On the right, we lost all our friends because they're obsessed with debt and seem to attribute economic development to contributing to debt instead of revenue, which is an impossible thought. I continue to not understand that flow of logic at all. On the left is an Ingham County Board of Commissioner, a friend of mine, called me out at a public meeting when we were doubling the size of a Fortune 500 national headquarters here in Lansing over the last year, creating 1,000 plus jobs at an average salary of $76,000. You can imagine an impact like that. Said to me, here's just another one of your, in quote, bailout schemes. So the anger from Wall Street and the bailouts is heavy set on the left. So right now, in my judgment, both at a state and maybe even a popular level here locally on our city council, I can tell you, is really tough. We have basically no friend on the left and right. Of course, I feel we're the ones that everyone should be friends with. The only solution to any of this is to generate revenue. And guess who generates revenue? Actually, not us, you. The private sector, and we are to help you. I mean, that's the only way out of this. That is the only solution. There is no other solution, and that is what we do. We care about people. Economic development is not necessarily about helping jobs or even entrepreneurs. The end game, in my judgment, is helping people, that you are helping families. That is what our profession is about. Well, I think that that we learned our lessons in all this, and I can become passionate about it quite quickly. But a new governor was elected with a new approach. Good. It doesn't matter necessarily whether you agree or disagree or are a Democrat or Republican in my judgment. But trying new ideas really matters. I hope we can all say sometimes, hey, that isn't working. We should stop and do this. Or this is working, whatever your political beliefs are. I don't think it's about it right now. It's another natural reaction. We needed to do things differently. We needed to try things differently. And this approach, and so in economic development and the administration, and I think Michigan's culture right now, is that we must innovate. And as a profession, as a policy. And so what we've decided is that, frankly, we're going to be maybe a little bit less about brick and mortar, a little bit less about chasing plants and all of that. I mean, focusing on entrepreneurialism. And so there are a number of programs that have been put in place, and I can't believe I'm referring to myself as an old timer, but maybe I am at this point with a bit of a 20-year history here. But I've had, and I think people like me have had to learn from Paul, frankly, and others, how to really change how we're doing economic development. Is not chasing the brick and mortar so much, though I still believe in it very much. And but how are we going to think about placemaking and talent in arts and culture, in infrastructure, in education. In other words, how are we paying attention to the spokes of the wheel if you still accept that the center of the wheel is job creation, our ultimate measurement? But what about all these spokes to make the whole wheel run? And that is the innovations that we're trying to make. So here locally, we went out 4 years ago, had no idea what we were doing. We bought 2 3D printers. We barely knew what it was about or what it did, except they are used constantly by people, because entrepreneurs can take a prototype that would have taken them 6 months to find a manufacturer and a whole lot of money, and you build one and you finally get it and it's completely wrong, and then they got to go through the whole process again, whereas we can do it in a day, quite literally. And Brian's office is very involved in this. Another innovation is Spartan innovation. MSU, Brian articulated very well their history and their innovations now. Well, there is a staff that is for real. That wasn't there before at Michigan State University. And these guys really know what they're doing about commercializing ideas and product out of Michigan State University. If they're the pitcher, maybe our part as LEAP is to be the catcher. That's not their responsibility to make sure that these businesses land and grow in our region. Although I think they believe in that. But that is really our duty. Their job is to pull out, which is very difficult, the real hard part of the work, which is to pull out those ideas and innovations and stubbornness and change them from research into practical application of business. And for me, that means jobs. That's something, so I'm very, very encouraged what is happening. And that needs to go beyond U of M and Michigan State and maybe Wayne State and go to our entire university system across the area. And they're being very much connected by something called the Research Corridor, where U of M, MSU, Wayne State are all talking the same language and trying to share the same ideas about how can we work together. Yes, we have a lack of wet lab space. There is a lot of wet lab space down in Ann Arbor, though, by the way, and in Kalamazoo, and in Holland. How do we connect all of these ideas and folks so that we're not duplicating and wasting money and yet providing a product so the whole state can thrive? Finally, just a couple other things. We have, so how do you change all this? What are we really trying to do, the innovation? Well, it's really a difficult thing because as it turns out, what I've learned so far in innovations in trying to help startup businesses, we touched 25 startup businesses at LEAP last year with very value-added, step-by-step approach. And in total, they created 25 jobs. I mean, it's something essentially that's their own business, basically. Now, some could be a Google. I think they will be. Some can be a NIOWave that didn't exist 7 years ago and 2 months ago announces a $200 million medical isotope production facility here. I mean, that does happen. That's why we're doing the work. The trouble is measuring and proving to the public, to pull this full circle and wrap up, is how do we prove to the public that our work in innovation, which is a great part about entrepreneurialism and startup business, but it's not super strong with job creation. So what are we doing? What is it really trying to produce? That ecosystem, trying to change an entire mindset, trying to change an entire culture. Not easy. More so, the public and the left and the right are going to ask us every year, as they do, and they should, what are your measurements? What did you do? Well, I was at a famous IEDC conference 2 years ago, and they suggested that job creation can't be one of our most basic measurements anymore. Whoa. I mean, that is a heavy-duty thought. What are we about? Well, again, innovation, trying to create this culture and ecosystem, and it is the right thing to do, but how do you measure it is something I very much worry about. So we putting in place a network of incubators that go beyond just high tech. They're a maker incubator, very famous down in Ann Arbor. They are trying to get wet lab space going. We're putting in place a fashion incubator. It'll be the top one of the top ones in the country. It'll open in 2 months in our NAPS building, downtown Lansing. That's going to be amazing. And then we do have our high-tech incubators. We have an idea of putting them all in what we're calling a regional incubation network, where we can share better programs, standards, branding, relationships, to make that entire system work across our region. We have a youth entrepreneurial program where we're having a trade show at the Lansing Center this April. We're hoping that we have 100 kids from our high schools who have been identified and trained over the last few months as starting and being able to present a business startup prototype and a plan and themselves, the soft skills. And there's so much more that we're trying to do, but that's where we're trying to go. I worry about how we keep the public engaged with us as economic developers right now, because I worry that these things, these innovations that our profession are going through, are very, very difficult to measure. I think are very, very difficult and somewhat elite. Hard to explain to the average person why they're important and why we really are changing life. It'll take a generation. People are impatient. What have you done for me lately? So these are all the challenges that face us, as clearly we're innovating. But I'm bullish on Michigan. There's no one coming to save us. That is a liberating thought. We're on our own, and we're doing it, and I'm very hopeful for the future of Michigan and Lansing. We're going to be a big winner in the global economy. Thanks.